There was a time when getting lost felt very different from what it feels like today. It wasn't something you could fix in seconds. It wasn't something you solved by pulling a phone out of your pocket and tapping a screen. It was slower, uncertain, sometimes stressful, and if you didn't know where you were going, you needed something physical, something you could hold in your hands. You needed a map, and not just any map, but one that had been carefully designed, printed, folded, and distributed by people whose job was to turn entire cities, highways, and countries into something readable, something useful, something that could guide millions of people every single day. And for a long time, this wasn't a niche or a small industry. It was massive, it was everywhere. And behind every map, there was a system, a process, and a profession that most people never thought about: map printers. And then, almost without anyone noticing, that entire world began to disappear. So what really happened to map printers? How did a job that once felt essential become almost irrelevant? To understand that, you have to go back to a time before GPS, before smartphones, before real-time navigation, back to a world where information didn't update instantly, where roads changed but your map didn't, and where accuracy depended on careful work done long before you ever used it. Map printing was not just about pressing ink onto paper. It was a complex process that started with data collection. Surveyors gathered information about roads, landmarks, distances, and terrain. Then cartographers turned that data into visual layouts, deciding what to include, what to leave out, how to represent space in a way that made sense to the human eye. And only after all of that did the printing begin. Large printing presses produced thousands, sometimes millions of copies. Folding machines prepared them for use, and distribution networks sent them to gas stations, bookstores, travel centers, and roadside stops across the United States. Maps were not optional, they were necessary. Drivers kept them in their cars, travelers relied on them for long trips, families planned routes using them before even starting the engine, and if you were going somewhere new, a map was often the first thing you reached for. There were different types for different needs. City maps for navigating streets, highway maps for long-distance travel, specialized maps for tourists, truck drivers, and delivery routes, each one carefully designed to balance detail and clarity. Too much information made it confusing. Too little made it useless. And that balance required skill, experience, and constant adjustment. Map printers worked closely with publishers and designers, updating editions regularly, correcting errors, adding new roads, removing outdated ones, and every new version meant another round of printing, another cycle of production. And for years, this system worked. It was reliable, trusted, and deeply integrated into everyday life. But there was always a limitation. Maps were static. Once printed, they couldn't change. If a road closed, if construction began, if a new route opened, your map didn't know, and that gap between reality and paper was always there, sometimes small, sometimes critical, but it was accepted because there was no better alternative. Then slowly something new started to appear: early digital mapping systems. At first they were not impressive. They were limited, often inaccurate, and not widely available. Most people didn't take them seriously. Printed maps still dominated, still felt more reliable, more familiar, but technology improved. GPS became more accurate, devices became smaller, and digital maps started to update more frequently. And then came the real turning point: smartphones. Suddenly navigation was not something you prepared for in advance. It was something you did in real time. You didn't need to plan your entire route before leaving. You could adjust instantly, get directions step by step, avoid traffic, find new places on the go, and most importantly, you didn't need paper. You didn't need to buy a map. You didn't need to unfold it, refold it, or struggle to read it while driving. Everything was in your pocket, always updated, always available, and that changed behavior completely. People stopped buying maps, stopped carrying them, stopped thinking about them, and as demand dropped, the entire system behind them started to break. Printing became less frequent. Distribution slowed down. Fewer locations stocked them. And the large-scale operations that once made sense financially started to struggle. Printing presses that were once running constantly began to slow, then stop. Companies that specialized in maps either adapted or disappeared. Some moved into digital services. Others couldn't make the transition, and the profession of map printing began to shrink, not because it failed, but because the world around it no longer needed it in the same way. There were also economic factors. Printing requires materials, paper, ink machines, maintenance, storage, and transportation, all of which cost money. And when fewer people are buying the product, those costs become harder to justify. Digital maps, on the other hand, can be updated instantly and distributed at almost no cost per user. That difference alone was enough to shift the entire industry. But the story is not just about technology. It is also about how people interact with information. In the past, using a map required attention. You had to read it, understand it, think about your route, remember key turns. It was an active process. Today, navigation is passive. You follow instructions, you listen to directions, you trust the system, and that shift reduced the need for understanding space in the same way, which made printed maps feel less necessary, less relevant. Today, printed maps still exist, but they serve a different purpose. They are often used for specific situations, remote areas with poor signal, tourism, or as backup tools. Some people still prefer them for planning or for the experience itself. But they are no longer a standard part of daily life, and the people who once printed them at scale are mostly gone, replaced by developers, data engineers, and digital platforms. What makes this story interesting is how quiet the change was. There was no single moment when printed maps disappeared, no clear ending, just a gradual decline year after year. Fewer prints, fewer users, less demand, until one day something that once felt essential became optional and then almost forgotten. And if you look around today, you can still find a printed map folded in a glove compartment sitting in a drawer or hanging on a wall. A reminder of a time when finding your way required something physical, something planned, something human. And just like many other professions, map printers didn't disappear because they were not useful. They disappeared because something faster, easier, and more convenient took their place. And it happened so quietly that most people never even noticed the moment it was gone.